Most often, the message of a story is born from victory. Good triumphs over evil, love defeats hate, bravery resides over cowardice, and we witness which specific elements allowed a hero to succeed, whether it's perseverance, friendship, romance, or any number of generally positive qualities. At the most basic, these are core themes summarized in simple statements. Good always defeats evil, for example. Although many do go further than that, often serving as a gentle reminder of things we already know but find too easy to forget. That no matter what, our life is valuable, that we can always change, or that connection is the most important thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with a story which settles on telling us something like, you should always keep trying, because those underlying truths are what allow us to reach greater depths of theme anyway. Anything which discusses deeper topics includes those themes still, just with more layers on top of them. Personally, I've always been more of a fan of these stories which develop their message in a more gray area of morality and through failure, though, where there isn't a good side and a bad one, just two camps desperately carrying out what they think is right, but also just kind of what they desire at the same time to really muddy the waters. Heroes who manipulate and cheat to defeat greater villains, systems which perpetuate themselves for godhood but while still raising the floor for most of society, or sacrifice which doesn't win but simply persists. These conflicts without a clear answer open the door quite directly, as if to say, why didn't things have a happy ending? What do you think the answer is? As someone obsessed with feeling smart to find personal value in a quite meaningless world, I really do value the chance they provide in that. But today, that specific question comes from Jin Roh, the story of Fuse, a soldier for an oppressive military wing, the Kerberos unit of the Capitol Police, who becomes enveloped in conspiracy after his failure to shoot a revolutionary terrorist carrying a bomb. His inability to act on the situation comes from the fact that, well, he's not shooting an armed soldier who's considered the odds and decided to die for the cause like many others, men who fight with passion and are hardened by combat, but because she's a Red Riding Hood, young girls who help transport the weapons for others within the sect. It's a picture of innocence and tragedy above representing any one side. And so, instead of opening fire, he asks a simple, one-word question to no response. Why? As the rest of his unit arrives and threatens her more so than he did solo, she sets off the device with a look of utter horror, dealing massive damage to the city's infrastructure. It's hard to imagine this not shaking anyone. This time, the fire isn't aimed at someone who shot first, pinging off the unit's heavy armor, but at a young woman who's shrinking away in fear, only worsened when there's harsh lights and tens more rifles in her face. Someone who'd be dead from one shot, and yet he holds an entire bandolier of bullets in front of her. It doesn't feel like this should be happening, this mismatch of life and death. The moment of her decision is distinct from the others as well, expressing not rebellion, not righteousness, but desperation. The final choice of someone acting in fear, deciding that if they are going to die anyway, they might as well die by their own hand. Why likely has an unsatisfying answer. What choice did I have? After the incident, the eyes of those in charge are on Fuse as they seek to make him a pawn for bringing down the Capitol Police. If they can stage a relationship between him and the Sect, they can argue he's a mole who allowed the bomb to go off, set the militant wing as untrustworthy and compromised, and shut it down for good. Despite being an underhanded move, they do express that it's in service of peace, even saying quite bluntly,
"We have to steer away from armed confrontations and quickly begin positive activities that promote peace and good public order."
This is where the gray morality rears its head. The opening of Jin Roh makes it clear that citizens and soldiers alike are dying in the streets from this conflict, most often due to the Capitol Police. With the life of one man ruined and a few more out of their jobs, they can save many more lives overall than they mess up here. Do immoral tactics invalidate the goal when that goal is saving lives? Either way, they bring in Kei, a captured revolutionary, and have her pose as the young woman's older sister, tasked with developing a romance with Fuse when they meet by chance at her sister's grave. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to keep saying her sister even though the relation is false. However clever a setup though, this only begins to work because of a continuation of Fuse's question. He's seeking to understand something, to find what's causing his guilt by confronting the person he failed to shoot once more, at least as much as he can. They could only feed him this information, use him as a pawn and not a man, exactly because he was human enough to feel guilt for his actions, even when he didn't shoot. If he didn't express a desire to visit the grave, they never would have gotten him to use. In a way, the morality then gets even more gray here. Fuse is a soldier. He is someone who is killed and someone who assists in organized violence. But it is these shreds of humanity left within him which allow him to be abused. This means that he is in some inherent way still very human by this premise. And we see this only weigh on his psyche more as he and Kei do grow close, spending days together in what the superiors recall being some of his only time off base. For the first time, it seems, he has something to go out for, to care about, to become better for even. If anything, his humanity is ironically growing from this use as a pawn. So naturally, having already led to the death of her sister, he begins to have nightmares about it happening again in this more vulnerable mindset, where packs of wolves he stands within tear her limb from limb, and he's helpless to do anything about it, or worse, seeing himself senselessly pulling the trigger to blast her into mince. Their long, drawn-out sequences stressing his place among the beasts and the violence he can enact. Really, the dreams are quite literal. It's something anyone should be able to see at least some of the point of. With all the Red Riding Hood imagery and talk, down to reading directly from the fairy tale, he's seeing himself as the wolf in human clothing, luring in a young girl to destroy her. He only appears human, he isn't actually so. But less allegorically, it's also of note that the wolves show no signs of attacking him or even seeing him as noteworthy. To them, he's just another of the pack, beast recognizing beast. And most notably, he's the one who opens the door for them to actually get at Kei. He's the sleeper who sneaks his way in and creates a path for destruction, even if he himself doesn't want to cause it or understand why. As she says, "You can't come with me," implying to the human side. He tries anyway, and it leads to her brutal death. There could be no way someone could miss what this means, right? And yet, he seems to at least ignore them, if nothing else. The reason for these deeply held fears isn't quite humanity alone, but because he's actually aware of the conspiracy. He's a member of Jin Roh, or the Wolf Brigade, a secret counterintelligence unit within the Capitol Police dedicated to perpetuating the military wing. His specific job is to reverse the plans against them, showing up the night they used Kei as bait to capture the evidence and him alike, and instead take her back to reunite with Jin Roh, as they then hold a trump card. A girl who proves underhanded dealings against them from the people they are supposed to be working with. As long as they hold her captive and alive, no one can make a move, so rather than being taken down from this plot, they would instead gain even more power. This is what Fuse's role is, and what his dreams are warning him against, as he willingly aids the continuation of this authoritarian power over citizens just like Kei, who he comes to care for and love. It's not just about being the one to kill her directly, but opening the door for the wolves to reach all of humanity itself, what she represents, the side he can't follow her to. What happens when there's no gate holding back the beasts? It shows how much his guilt could even continue to grow. Deep down, we see that not only is he still asking why, but that this why is actually booming louder. And he almost acts on it, as he does manage to turn the trick around and escape with Kei. However, they don't return right to Jin Roh, but rather sneak around the city first, proving he could come and go as he pleases, even with the city on lockdown. Eventually, they return to a spot where he and Kei shared an important conversation before to have one more. We'll get into what she says here later, but this is his first hint of recognizing what's within when he says,
"How about we? No, never mind, forget it."
It's simple but meaningful. Those few words are some of the first he said, not according to a script or a rulebook, often simply being the soldier who can give a textbook answer and then quiet back down forever. The kind of person who sacrificed all of their self for duty. Those few words are nothing to us, but are exponentially different for him. Kei intuits that he must be speaking about escaping, and excitedly agrees, saying they could go anywhere as anyone. This is the moment where, if it was the former case we discussed in the intro, The story would have Fuse come to terms with his actions and path and choose to suffer in order to break free for a greater value, atone, and eventually make up for his ignorance and live a life that was free of his own with someone he loves. After all, he hasn't actually killed any of the police up to this point, and with his questioning, there are hints that deep down this could be because he harbors a deep respect for life and is just waiting to emerge. He could come to protect it, not destroy it, make everyone aware of Jin Roh and have it brought down to ashes. We could see that it's never too late to change, that the skills we develop and the moments we have, even if staged, are our own to do with as we see fit, that we could turn them against all masters. It would be a nice little message that our lives are always ours if we could make it so. But this isn't what happens, as Fuse turns down her suggestion, saying that he still has something to do here. Depressed, she backs away, but follows as he returns to Jin Roh, puts on his gear gathered from the other members, and dons the iconic mask which removes his very identity, just as it's stated by his leader Tobei that,
"And now you're able to see the real Fuse. We are wolves, disguised as men."
a man without a face of his own. The moment of burgeoning individuality is squashed underneath a literal removal of his identifying features with the place he chose to return to. He proceeds to slaughter the police who are chasing him, even his former friend turned enemy Henmi, who he felt was too human to be a soldier any longer. It's exactly what the man thinks about before he's killed, asking Fuse,
"You're human, too, aren't you?"
with his last words. He's stunned. How did this man questioning might come to embody it? Fuse's response is that deafening sound of gunfire held for longer than it needs to be. It's all done cold and methodically, almost wielding power over them as he takes all their fire before returning his own. Nothing they do can even scratch him. There's no need to actually kill them to survive, but he does because that is his order. The twist is that despite every sign Fuse would question this world and against it, despite every bit of power he had that would make him able to, he doesn't and willingly takes the path of a beast as it's narrated to him that that's what he is. That he was not avoiding killing from a respect for life, but because his orders were not yet to kill. All this time, he was the thoughtless soldier, eventually killing without a thought for the lives taken away, maybe the most disrespect one could possibly do to them. When it seemed that everything would be heading in the opposite direction, when it seemed so obvious, so capable, why is this what happened? What created the beast? Understanding why is a complex web of society, his own personality, his interactions, and of course his background. In the lattermost case, part of the reason is because, well, he was trained to be this way, away from consideration and towards thoughtlessness, tactics they use in making him the ideal soldier. First of all, we could summarize it with almost just the phrase muscle memory. When Fuse stands trial after the initial incident, he's put back through training to test whether he can recover or not, and what we see of the training is quite intense. The recruits pass through a scenario in tight underground tunnels where the much more experienced Tobei puts them through their paces, blinding them, pushing them down the stairs in gear so heavy it needs help to get in and out of, shooting them in the joints with rubber bullets, and when it's all done, they have 10 minutes to rest before they're thrown back in to try it again and again until they succeed with enough alive to satisfy the trainers. Without any character ever doing the most annoying thing many series would do and saying, "Oh, training is so brutal," we get a complete sense that it is hell and requires nothing but the fastest impulse reactions to succeed and stop being exhausted from. This is how Fuse should have passed, breaking through a wall to surprise Tobei, but once again failing to pull the trigger despite the advantage. Those reactions, and those alone without the human consideration which followed in his case, are what passing requires. And that's exactly the point. The only way they can get through this is by having it drilled into them again and again, knowing that it only ends once they can act it out like it's second nature. They're beat down and reformed, only allowed to rest once they learn to act not on thought, but on instinct. To move in set formations, playing by the strengths and weaknesses of the armor, acting before a thought can cross their mind, and if it does, like Fuse, they will fail. We see how deeply this affects his mentality when earlier speaking on the incident he says,
I meant to shoot her. I actually meant to shoot her.
What he experienced was a conflict of these rules beat so deep into him, his own true thoughts, ones which he can't even understand because they've been pushed so far back. He doesn't know why he didn't shoot, he just knows that he didn't when everything he knew was telling him he should have. If we examine the inciting situation, had the rest of the squad not run around the corner, it may have ended up well, because deep down he knew it was wrong to shoot. He could have convinced her not to, but the training which tells him to treat everything like combat forced her hand and forced him not to act on his own thoughts. Those instincts they provide them further stroke this kind of violence, reinforcing itself and creating a space where peace is never an option. Additionally, a large part of this training is also about stoking one specific instinct to work off of: fear. It's not enough to just tell people how to act to get this strong of a reaction. You have to make them feel a negative reaction behind it, get the power of survival behind it. This is something that makes Henry more sympathetic despite his treachery, as he calls Tobei out for this practice, the kind of reason why he quit this very path. The reason they use rubber bullets and not, say, paint pellets in their training is because of the pain it causes. He knows it will make the experience physically memorable in a way that paint can't simulate, and even more, instead of seeing the paint to know they died, they'll actually be on the ground in pain, unable to fight. He wants them to feel that suffering, to fear it, to avoid it, and in a combat situation, avoiding it means being the first one to pull the trigger. If someone surrenders, he'll shoot them even more right in the soft spots of the armor so that they feel every sting, and again to reinforce the idea. Don't think, don't ask to survive, the only option is shoot. That's how you avoid this pain. So it's not just that they are trained to act on instinct, but that the instinct chosen is fear. They want a driving force which is blunt and raw and drawn out of desperation, to look an enemy in the face and see not a person, but a source of pain which can only be rid of through murder. Everything is combat, and combat is all about shooting first. But what if somehow they do break free from those bounds and consider? After all, Fuse has gone through all of this and he's still managed to, at least somewhat, even if he fails to act on it. Well, there are preparations for that too, as the way they describe the other side's mentality is this mystical thing of something they simply can't understand. They present the minds of the revolutionaries as foreign and even twisted, acting not on human reason but on ghastly logic. Something that people shouldn't even try to waste their time considering because of course it's impossible to. It's ironic to look at people who are so pressed down by the world around them they'd be willing to die to change it and call it incomprehensible, all but directly stating to these soldiers that the only way to live is not to think as the other side has. The reasons for their behavior are there and understandable, they just needed to be considered. Of course, there are differences in their mindsets, but they come from the same places, they breathe the same air, live the same lives outside of their duties. There is no world where these differences are truly incomprehensible. But this is exactly what the Capitol Police wants to stop as they foil the plot to remove them and begin fostering peace and understanding. Literally, peace and understanding is what they're seeking to prevent. There are those who know it can be done, no thought and consideration lead to understanding, and those who choose not to do it and pass that mindset on. But it's because this harsh world which crafted those bombers is also a huge consideration in Fuse's self and story in making him an ideal soldier. If there was a wide open world of freedoms, then the idea that Fuse would ignore thought to become beast would be laughable. As such, the oppressive one he resides within is just as much a consideration in his motivations as his training. In this world, it's expressed best in Kei and her sister, so we'll be looking at them. Both are sided with the Sect, and through that group we see the violence which is enacted on the people, where military might beats down protesters and men with basic rifles are gunned down by heavy machine guns through impenetrable suits of armor. They use violence of their own, but it's always answered with an even greater force to destroy them outright. The wider world is a muted palette of grays and browns, with poverty often a focus of the establishing shots and views of the setting. People live on the streets, or if not in rooms with nothing in them but the most bare necessities. Those trying to fight for freedom have to do so in the sewers of all places. It's a dark and depressing world where people lack a wider sense of purpose or meaning to life, mostly just surviving and searching for it in the most meager of ways. But the way we see this expressed best is by Kei, as when Fuse trudges off for his slaughter, she yells after him,
"If only we could have both died together! At least I know I would have had a place in your heart. I wanted someone to remember me."
It's saying that this world is so devoid of meaning that simply dying while in the thoughts of another, securing that as the final moment of life and as such proving some value from it as the last thought, is a consideration. That so little elsewhere can provide this value, it has to be found in the loss of life, not in the living of life. It's the same as the look on her sister's face when she dies. Not righteousness, but fear. What other choice did I have? This is even directly a line from Kei in that same speech, expressing that she used Fuse because she had to. And really, she did. Her sister, another Red Riding Hood, was once a simple student who got involved with the political opposition, which likely led to her being more restricted and as such more aggressive in her own pushback, where she was eventually suspended and expelled. In a culture where not following the standard path locks you out of achieving later in life, exacerbated even further by strict authoritarian rule. They can basically decide through the systems within society that your life is over, and that's what they did for her. She becomes a bomb carrier not because she wants to, but because she has no other options. People don't choose to risk their lives and have a hand in murder just because. They do it because this world offers nothing else, that they have to scrape for the possibility of value through violence. Horrible methods are all that's left to them for this basic human desire, to be part of anything more than just bare survival. They perform their tasks dead-eyed and emotionless despite the familial dialogue of the fairy tale framing, because they are, just as a soldier, following orders. Having some action to perform which leads to something, anything at all, like their efforts before never did. There is no passion behind what they're doing, no desire to really be here. It's simply hoping that maybe one day anything they do can make a difference and prove their life was worthwhile. They want hope or purpose or opportunity, things which they've been locked out of, existing only as tools for either side. It's just that one offers the faintest glimmer of hope that maybe they could at least die in service of something. What other choice did I have is a true statement. It's a world where thought actually becomes exhausting, witnessing the divide, the horror, the way things could be so different from what they are, and fighting with all your being to try and make it that way, and yet the authority persists, justifying itself in a never-ending cycle. You can think and think, even act on those thoughts, and what comes from it? Just that they warp your actions into more excuses to continue crushing. Kei accepts being their tool, presumably when they offer her freedom from imprisonment, because she grew tired of wasting all that energy for no result, to not even be able to find value in suffering. This is what she expresses to Fuse when she says,
"It became such a chore having to think all the time. I thought it best not to think about anything. In a way, it almost seemed comforting."
Much like the soldiers are trained, so too was she, just in a less regulated, less obvious way. She was beaten down, proved as worthless, valueless again and again, until it becomes laughable to think about trying once more on her own. And in that, there is another kind of ideal soldier. A girl who would carry out any order, even to use someone she comes to love, because there is no other option to be comfortable. There is no scenario where thought leads to benefit. So you just follow. The only way to secure any kind of comfort was to turn off one's mind and act on their orders, allowing the cycle to continue its controls, because even if it persists, at least you get something from it persisting. The harshness of this world is the baseline to create people like Fuse, the floor which must be laid before his training can seem like a better option, only reinforcing the same ideas in its deceptive fashion. This is how thought is removed. This is the wider context which Fuse is in before he becomes a soldier, and so it is inherently a driving force as to why he is so, and why he refuses to think. He misses obvious signs because through and through, this is a world where awareness of the horror one lives within is nothing but suffering without change, and more so, even a risk to their stability. Ironically then, the more strict lack of individuality and thought of the soldier's path becomes the meaningful one, because at least it puts firm order and direction to their lives. Fuse is being honest when he says,
I finally found a place where I belong.
He lived under the same oppression as her, and this is the one path that offered security, power, the ability to have something they told him was worthwhile and good, the very authority he maintains. It's observable, solid, and purposeful, if nothing else. There was so little elsewhere that this truly did feel like purpose and meaning to life to follow these orders. He becomes such an ideal soldier because he takes this to heart. The other soldiers fail the test that he passes, which require a complete lack of thought. They slack off and play games with their pay, focused on something outside of being a soldier. They are only one so far as it sustains the things they enjoy more in life from the security they get from being above poverty. Even if they don't think about the world, they still think about themselves at least. Fuse, however, he sits around doing nothing on base, whether outside or in his room, to the point the others don't even consider him further activities when he's sitting right there. He passes the training with flying colors, safe as one mistake, and gives exact textbook answers to every question. He's always running or training, even as they debate his future and decide to use him as a pawn. His dedication knows no bounds because this is a world without purpose or value, and so he's taken these orders as those things. They are the very fulfillment of his life. The system has worked and churned out the ideal soldier, a man who can't even act on the most obvious signs of painful thought until the bitter end. The most ironic part, though, is that he is exactly the very thing they should fear as well. In making someone this powerful, or rather in making them the very source of your power, you create a threat because your status then resides in their will. Think about it. He's able to sneak past and disable an entire squad of police whose sole task is to prevent him from escaping, and he does it without even breaking a sweat. He can best the man they bring in to train the most elite soldiers. He can move around a city that's on lockdown with a non-trained civilian in tow and be perfectly fine. He's proven that he could be the exact person to make a change. He is dedicated and powerful and trained enough to do so. Those like him are the only reason this oppression has teeth. But he becomes that way because he's already cast off the ability to think, to dedicate himself to becoming that way, so he won't ever go against them. The very act of becoming strong enough to fight them is what ensures one never will, and then he instead acts as the perpetuation of all the system which forced him down that path to begin with, ensuring Kerberos survives long into the future. Each aspect feeds into the others. It's a cycle of organized violence unlike any other. Making a world so harsh that people have no one to think, making the one purpose allowed to them the actions of violence which create that harsh world, and using every pushback as more evidence to strengthen it all once more. It's fitting then to describe them as beasts, because they follow nothing more than nature's original rules, the perpetuation of the species. Despite these orders being purpose for Fuse, they are nothing more than the basic survival of a pack with no benefit to the world. But seeing how Fuse was still haunted by his repressed thoughts and dreams during all of this, it seems inevitable that even the most dedicated of the bunch will eventually recognize what's going on and be confronted by their horror. This is something which can't be fought. The human being needs to exercise its ability to think and be considered one to begin with. Our minds are often smarter and more active than we like to think or express. And so the real final action of the cycle is to remove the ability for that thought to go anywhere when it does happen, even for the most powerful, so that when it does, it becomes truly worthless. To create a stage where it's too late for consideration to have effect, forcing them to dig deeper down the path, and on their own acts of consideration for the first time, choose not to go against it, but to go with it. When Fuse secures Kei for Jin Roh, there's one last step. A woman who's alive is a good insurance policy. If things come to the worst, she's proof that their enemies acted against their own ideals and laws. But there's one way you prevent things from getting to the worst and ensure they can never rid you of that policy at the same time. Secure and then kill her so she can never be proven dead or stolen back.
The only way that she can stay alive for our purposes is for her to die here.
Fuse is ordered to kill Kei, finishing the plot to their security. Tobei gives him a gun for this and walks away, but only to a nearby barn where a sniper is trained on them both and ready to fire. A good soldier like Fuse would know this, that they'd never truly leave such an important target alone with his will. And so here, confronted with the obvious fact that they would lie, cheat, steal, and kill even innocent, abused people for their goals, unable to deny it, as it's literally tasked to him to recognize it, he has two options: refuse and they both die, or kill her and he at least lives. All this thought can only lead to pain in this moment. His survival means actively choosing the path of the beast. The completion is made in a consideration so horrid he'll never want to face the truth again, following orders for the rest of his life to avoid a moment of calm where he can recognize their real horror, which he himself has now directly perpetuated. The training bullets weren't the real pain, the exhaustion wasn't either. The real pain was the buildup of wasted thought, of missing all the obvious signs in ignorance, only to finally see them once it was much too late, and from there, never wanting to see them ever again for certain and being able to do nothing about them. To finally think only once it has no benefit, locking it away once and for all. The saddest fact is that Henmi was right when he said that
Maybe it just means that he's human.
about Fuse's failure to shoot. The soldier wasn't just playing a part there, something deep within him was screaming his real desires to be human. But in the end, he has to choose to shoot the very person he was afraid of allowing others to kill. Because he was human, they made him choose to become a beast to survive. His options narrowed more and more as he missed the signs until he was stuck in the past and forward was the only way. There's no more opening the door for the wolves. There's no shred of humanity left. There is just another beast among the pack. Fuse complies and kills a Kei who's grasping at him and crying. And standing there remains a man who had no choice but to forcibly understand the beast, just as he became one too, all too aware of the downfall he could have avoided, and even more beastly in all this pain. Of course, the main question of Jin Roh is, what is the line between man and beast? From what I presented here today, you can probably tell my idea would be thought. It's not an original take. For hundreds of years, the idea has been presented that the ability to make our own decisions, not nature's decisions, is what defines the human being. However, it doesn't have to be in such a violent or natural framework to hold weight. The concept doesn't go away when a pleasant society rises, and in fact, it may even be more sinister within a polite society. Jin Roh emphasizes the concept with the extreme situation, exaggerating it so we can understand it, but it applies in many more situations. It's something you can encounter every day and have probably done yourself, where we disregard thought to simply follow orders in one way or another. You might not have known this because I never mention it, but I hate my day job. However, I'm usually the one placed on the hardest tasks, despite hating it because I do it well. My boss has expressed to me in private that I'm the one person he hears I'm done with that project from and is relieved because he knows it's actually finished and won't need rework. I'm of course not perfect and I've made silly mistakes as well. I've been super embarrassed by some, but because of this trust, I usually end up being the fix the fuck up person. A project will be shipping in a few days or a customer is coming to see it and it's my job to catch all the things that would make them realize we can be kind of a shitty company at times. It's usually infuriating mistakes, the kind where you have to undo like 2 days worth of work to get at an issue which should have been fine the first time with 30 seconds of consideration and effort. People using the wrong hardware, not reading instructions, leaving out crucial parts and just putting them to the side. They're the kinds of things that my stupid goody two-shoes brain normally won't even let me consider, although of course on bad days I've done similar things. Those mistakes actually made me behind on YouTube work, on this specific script even, because I'd come home and be too stressed from witnessing these maddening mistakes to effectively write. What gets me about it all is that really, truly, it's the kind of things that have no excuse to not be caught. Sometimes it required extra info from other coworkers, things like that, but getting that in 5 minutes would save me hours down the line, and they still don't do it. It's likely something you've cursed out about your own work and in wider situations. There could be an application that was returned because of like one number difference, a small mistake that anyone should have intuited correctly, but they sent it back through these lengthy channels instead. A restaurant could still put bacon on a vegetarian burger. The person in front of you could slam the door in your face because they couldn't take a second to look back like that, and many more things you could come up with. And in many cases, you've probably also been that person. I've been that person. It feels almost like a requirement to exist. We understand when we do it to be that person sometimes. Because think about it, in reality, if you're like on a fast food line pumping out hundreds of burgers a day, the only way to get through it is to default to muscle memory. The ones who swim are the ones who can manage that. And I have a friend who gets a plain burger, just meat and bun, and every time it comes out with cheese and toppings and he has to send it back, only taking up more time and energy for everyone. And it's annoying for him and everyone waiting with him, but every time I understand the worker's point of view as well. It's what we just said. They're getting paid nothing to produce at a high pace. You trade off quality for quantity. But then this goes against how I feel when I'm at my own work, because I understand why my coworkers aren't thinking and missing these obvious things, but it's still something that weighs on me and can spoil a whole day. It's like there's no good solution, and the only result is exhaustion, to accept that that's how things are and just continue without considering it, because thinking about it only leads to a loop, to frustration, and to no real solutions, because we know it feels like a necessity. And that's probably the point, isn't it? That confusion in this premise being laid on regular workers to cause conflict. It gets people to say things like, well, I wouldn't care if I was only paid minimum wage, and then 10 minutes later be mad about someone not considering these things, where their anger is directed laterally and apathy is the default state. We get exhausted and stop thinking to save what little of us is left for our own time, which leads to simple mistakes causing larger headaches, to more exhaustion, and it keeps going and going forever. The world is fucked up in part because at the end of the day, everything is just someone's job that they want to get home from. We do it and have it done to us, and that's how things remain. But this perpetuation is detrimental. I mean, let's think about it like this. At the end of the day, whether the project leaving my work are early or on time or late, I don't care. And in fact, I prefer they never leave the door, because all they do is help fuck the environment with plastics to create more convenient product waste, really ticking every box of what I think is going wrong with the world. But at some point, wasn't this the 5-second issue that people were worried about? The damage this industrialization did wasn't overnight. At some point, it was a small scale and much easier to fix issue that it would be so much easier to prevent then than it is now, all coded in apathy. I mean, it was known way earlier than you'd be led to believe we were doing damage to the world around us, and changing these things earlier in our timeline would have prevented it from being the big issue it is now. This is what I experience at work every day, where a 30-second walk could prevent 3 hours of work, but on a larger scale, where the real consideration and effort back then would have prevented all the apathy and excessive corrective effort now. But it was met with exhaustion, denial, scorn, and thinking about it led to nothing but being less happy and succeeding less. Thought is stifled, the issue grows and grows, and meanwhile that growth is really good for some people's pockets and power. We keep being too drained from these kinds of issues to prevent from doing them ourselves. They keep draining others who face their own work, which gets done without those important considerations just the same, and everything personal is held back, while the overall wider situation worsens in these continuing terrible ways. And once it's that terrible, does anyone want to think about it? Stepping out of the door to a spring day in like the second half of winter is kind of a horrible sign, but there is an absolute unyielding horror to recognizing that. It's why everyone relies on ironic humor now. To think that all this time we've taken a planet which is just the right spot to create life, which has housed us for the entire run of our species, the only place that could, and now, in the last tiny sliver of that history, we might be destroying it to the point that that very history ends with our generation. That we could very well be the last people to ever see some of this world's most defining features, despite being less than 1% of our species' total time here. There's so much weight to that, an entire class of being resting on the shoulders of so little of its total volume. If we were really thinking about that all the time, nothing would get done, because it's sheer horror. It would be existential crisis overload. To be happy, to keep existing with any respect to our own lives, we have to not think sometimes. The issue grows in our ability not to just fix it, but to even think about it lessens and lessens. And in one more hint of irony, this is what's beneficial for power. Someone trended away from thought is seemingly conversely the ideal worker. They might not provide the best work because they're not always putting in the thought for it, but they will keep on producing, that's for sure. They might get 5 burgers wrong throughout the day, but they're producing hundreds, so is it really that much of an issue for missing a few here and there? Those few angry customers won't outweigh the mostly satisfied ones. And they know that customers who are basically just as exhausted from working their own forms of these jobs aren't really going to take the time to complain when they just want to get home and spend what little time they have on themselves. When a system is dumb, when a person is forced not to think, whatever is going around them, the rock in the center which provides survival is work. It's a purpose, a stability in the midst of chaos produced from the lack of consideration in a world with so little value that 5 seconds could commonly outweigh 5 hours. Purpose and meaning are taken away so that they become intertwined with orders. Feeling purpose from production has some pretty obvious benefits for the people running production, and the less we think and the more we accept that fact. It's a quite brutal and intricate cycle, really. The reason why we discuss Jin Roh is because its tale isn't one detached from our world just because it's fiction, but because it's a more interesting, distinct version of what we experience every day. It draws you in with characters you come to love in a new world, makes you think it's going to end in triumph just to pull you down into depressing depths and leave you wondering, as the question it opens with, why? It's a story about the lack of thought, organized expressly to make the viewer think, almost completing its own message. A lot of the issues we face come from this lack of consideration. Those tiny issues that grow to so greatly stress us out arise here, and from those complications come the confusion which prevents us from recognizing the wider horror. Thinking sucks, and being the only one to think in the room or to do the good work and as such be stressed out from it is awful. But do we want to look back once the issue has grown and left us with no choice but to embrace the beast? The lack of pain now just means being greeted with a stronger suffering later, repeating the mistakes of our kind once more. Everything that now seems too tough to face once began as a simple issue unconsidered. I don't think we can afford many more of those. It's unfair, but there is no option but to be aware, to witness the horror and know its name, because without that name, we'll miss the obvious signs it gives off. I don't know how we change these issues, of course. To say so would be pretentious. But like a story building on basic themes, there is one truth at the heart of all solutions, which is awareness. Nothing can be fixed if not recognized first. The line between humans who create a better world and beasts who open the door for destruction is drawn only in thought.